A university that was now making more money being used as a film set.
Why would I go to university, accumulate debt?
To say universities aren't about opinion. We don't teach opinion.
Students challenge the ideas more these days.
Asking questions is the essence of what the university is.
They ask all the kind of stupid questions just like I do right now. Thank you so much for doing it again. So we'll start right away. And the idea that my goal is here to explore the idea of higher education in America, North America specifically. I know there are multiple examples, but I'm really focused on that today. So to kind of set a baseline, how would you define the main role of universities right now?
Well, I think it's changing. If you think back to higher education in North America in the 1950s, early 1950s, there would have been no more than maybe 15% of the population would think of going to university after they'd finished high school. I think the percentage would probably be quite a bit lower even. So those were days when there was a conception that university offered something very different from preparation for the job market. You would enter the job market by different routes in those days. And I think what's happened, really over the 50, 60 years since that time, is that obviously university participation levels have really increased. And along with that has come a slightly different conception of what a university education should be. So here I'm talking about societal understandings of this, not my own. I'm trying to talk about the way people see it. As recently as the end of the 20th century, I think there was a recognition that universities provide an education for citizenship in a way. They prepare someone for leadership in society, for contribution that could take many forms. In other words, education was understood as not particularly keyed to a particular career outcome. And it wasn't even a matter of inculcating skills. It was more a matter of cultivating intellectual and emotional and other forms of capacity. I think what's happened in the last let's go maybe a decade and a half, is that there's a view increasingly taken of university education which maps onto growing levels of participation, that universities are really about preparing people for the job market. And even though there's a recognition that that is a job market as kind of understood in a more sophisticated way, it is nevertheless the inculcation of skills that will enable you to do a particular job. And governments more and more think about universities as providing individuals who will play a role in the economic machine of the province or the state. I'm not sure that the students themselves or their parents necessarily want to view education in that way, but on the whole, society has been increasingly fixated on the idea of higher education as preparation for the workforce. So, I mean, recent governments in our province talk about job-ready students, whatever that is. And at a time when people can't really predict what the jobs of the future are, it's a very interesting expectation of universities to say prepare students for jobs we can't actually imagine just yet. And yet, I mean, the obvious answer to that is, well, therefore you go back to the original mandate of universities, which is to cultivate in people powers of analysis, powers of thought, the ability to think through a problem and to find solutions to it, cultural awareness, the ability to communicate, all of those things, which are personal characteristics which do equip students to do a whole lot of things that aren't necessarily on the agenda right now. But it's interesting that governments tend on the whole not to go back to the notion of a kind of liberal education as the empowering thing for students, even when they recognize that the jobs for which students are supposedly being prepared are undefinable or unpredictable in part. So for me as an educator, it's a very difficult moment because I passionately believe that these places don't exist just to train students to do a limited number of jobs. I think these places are about producing individuals who will, A, find fulfillment as individuals in their personal lives, their professional lives, who will be functioning, effective citizens and make our whole society a better thing, and will contribute to the growth and advancement of our society. I think that is what our aim ought to be, and that is traditionally what universities have been asked to do by society. This more recent thing.
And why do you think it kind of came back to the job? Because I'll be very honest, like I came to university with the idea as well to get, it was a kind of an economic boost. Like, you know, I come, I get my education, and then I go and get a job. That was my idea when I started my university. That consider that I'm coming from a different country, and that it is the reason, the only reason why people go to universities there. So why do you think the shift happened to more job orientated?
So the first thing I would say, there's absolutely nothing wrong with coming to university for that goal. For sure. So that is one thing that universities must do, right? And universities have always made the boast that, you know, attendance at a university, possession of a higher education qualification, does increase your earning potential in the future and all those things. So yes, that's all good. And none of that is problematic in terms of the overall mission of the university. So then your question is a good one. So what's the shift, and how did we end up where we are with people thinking of the primary function of the university as producing people who are job ready? It's partly economic times. There's a generational shift underway. You know, that period I was talking about in the 1950s and 60s, when a kind of a more, you might, for want of a better word, a more leisurely approach to higher education, you know, is licensed by that period of post-war prosperity and so on. My own son is 30 years old. He thinks of himself as a millennial. He's actually very anxious about his future. And so on his behalf am I. And that's true of many students and their families and the governments who support them. So I don't think there's any there's anything sinister about this drift. I just think it's a little misguided in the sense that, you know, if you want to be a brain surgeon, that's great. You know, if you're clear on that, there will be a need for brain surgeons, although presumably there'll be some kind of robotic thing in the future that you'll need to master. But, you know, if you do have specific professional goals, there's absolutely nothing wrong with coming to university to see those goals satisfied. On the other hand, all the jobs of the future are not all going to be like that, and they are not all that predictable at this stage. So then the critical question is, well, how do we educate students to be successful in those other areas where the skill is not presently identifiable or even predictable? And I think there, you know, you can look at almost any human challenge. Students will benefit from some multidisciplinary, cross-cultural understanding and awareness. They will benefit from powers of analysis. They will benefit from being able to communicate very well. They will benefit from being literate and numerate, whatever their field of interest. You know, people like myself who are literary humanities people need to be aware of science, technology, mathematics, those kinds of things. So, I mean, my thinking about this is that the best insurance against the future for young people now is that they need to have all those capacities. They've got to have an ability to understand things in a multidisciplinary way. They've got to have a problem-solving capacity. They've got to know how to work in teams. They've got to have a different notion of what leadership looks like, because it's very different nowadays. They've got to be, to some extent, self-directed, because the old days of, you know, a lifetime of career aspirations being satisfied by a paternalistic company, which employed you and then eventually pensioned you off 40 years later, that is largely gone. You know, so I think what's expected of people to be successful in all the ways I suggested, not just in personal career terms, but as citizens and so on, is a different model for education. And I would say it's probably a different model of education from the one that most institutions like ours currently exemplifies. So there's been a lot of discussion at McMaster lately about how you diversify the curriculum, how you build in that capacity for cross-disciplinary work, how you build in these things that people always call soft skills, which I think are critically important. But there's been a lot of discussion here and a lot of program change to recognize the importance of those fields. And I think that's the right direction to be moving in.
Why do you think that university is the best, not the best, but a very good institution to go and learn these skills? Like why, for example, especially considering the automation and considering everything that you described, that there will be jobs that we don't know even that are coming. Like why would I go to university, accumulate debt, and not just go and work, and then maybe through working and I will get the teamwork and soft skills and leadership? Again, keeping in mind the debt that we're accumulating while we're in school.
I think, so you might say, if you were simply wanting a particular skill to do a particular job, you might go to a college which will provide you with the skills. So what does university give you that other forms of education or, at workplace, practical learning gives you? Well, I think the big difference is that university education always tries to provide you with an intellectual framework. It could be theoretical. It could be broadly disciplinary, which allows you, whatever problem you're bringing your talents to bear on, to understand in big conceptual terms before you begin to formulate the particular solution, right? So, for example, you think of what's happened with medical education in recent years, right? So one of the results of that post-war period in increasing specialization is that people begin to think of the body and its various issues as essentially a very technical issue for medicalization, right? Now we're in a different phase in which people think of health problems as having broad determinants, both at the molecular level. So when you become, develop cancer or something, yes, there's something going on at the molecular level. But what about the other things? What about the environmental dimensions? What about the discrepancies between life expectancy and health outcomes, depending on socioeconomic background? So here in Hamilton, we know that depending on where you live in the city, your health outcomes are going to be dramatically different.
Okay.
So here we're looking then at a model of approaching health as a field in which people work that is not just technical, that involves a grasp of society and its issues, that it involves an understanding of culture, that does involve an understanding of what goes on at the molecular level. So, the biochemical stuff is still absolutely critical, but the likelihood of success on a particular human challenge is maximized by your bringing more to your work on that problem than would have been the case with someone who's just been narrowly technically trained. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. It's like that old thing, you don't even know how this idiom works, but anyway, to everything that looks like a nail, the hammer is the obvious solution, So if you've only got one solution, you always see the problem in certain terms. And I think the benefit of what a university enables you to do is it helps you understand that thing you're looking at as not just a nail, something more, but a more complex problem, and it helps you come to a more complex solution to it. And I think, that's true whether you're in engineering, whether you're in the medical field. It's true even if you're, if you're in social work. Yeah. There's it is important that you have a theoretical framework and a breadth of understanding of the many issues that impinge on your challenge to help you find the solutions.
With everything we're talking, like with the current technological advancements and what happened in the past 10, 20 years with the internet specifically, for example. So I actually looked into that, and internet pretty much disrupted every single industry with an exception of academia and healthcare. And my question is that, do you think it will ever disrupt academia and kind of become actually a serious player in some kind of online education, and will be able to provide the framework or everything that you described the university currently provide?
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question. What do I think about that? the first thing I'd point out is that the two fields you name have a lot in common because they have to do with human beings, right? So the problems you're dealing with, the capacities you're dealing with, are uniquely and enigmatically human. And I like to think, although, could be wrong on this, Brad, but I like to think that things that are fundamentally human will never lose a fundamentally human dimension, So yes, I'm sure in terms of healthcare, diagnostics will become more sophisticated. AI will do all kinds of things. It'll enable more effective radiographic interventions in healthcare and so on. So yes, I think the techniques available to people engaged in healthcare will become more and more sophisticated with technology. And undoubtedly, in that process, certain things currently done by human beings won't be done anymore, or will be done to a lesser extent. But I can't imagine, speaking as a human being, that, I would ever find the ultimate salutary experience, an experience with a machine. That makes no sense to me. And then I'd say the same thing about education, because I think education is a fundamentally communal thing, and it is a profoundly human thing in ways that are quite ineffable and difficult to express. Now, I've watched actually the appearance of technology in higher education with a lot of interest over the last 15, 20 years. And there was a time not so long ago, because I remember giving a talk about this at USA just after I started at Mac, when people were saying, eventually, there'll be MOOCs, a lot of universities will close down. I mean, why would you go to University X when you can take a bunch of MOOCs put online by Harvard and you're getting a Harvard education? Why would you go to
Exactly.
you? That was actually an interesting question, and I remember being struck by an article I read in one of the UK papers about a university that was now making more money being used as a film set than it was being used as a place
sad.
for education. It's terribly sad. So the question was, do all these beautiful campuses wind up film sets for Harry Potter type movies, right? And I don't think I ever believed in that threat, but certainly some people did, that we were, a major technological intervention had in a sense already occurred, and higher education institutions had better adapt themselves to this or die, or maybe there's no adapting to it. Death is inevitable. Well, I point out that higher education institutions are over 900 years old. I mean, the University of Bologna was founded 932 years ago. So, and there have been many major interventions in society and culture in that time, perceived to be very far-reaching and significant, and universities are still there.
Do you think it's because, is it fair because they've been here for so long that the trust in institutions are just so high that people are like McMaster have been here forever, Harvard being here forever, so I will go no matter what? Or you think, and then it's a question of, is it like just elite schools, or it's across the board?
Well, so that's a great question. See, I don't know whether I wouldn't turn it around. I mean, you could say that these places become self-perpetuating because of their reputation and that issue of public trust. And it's true, if you look at surveys of what institutions are trusted in Canada, people typically don't trust governments, and there's certain things they don't trust. Maybe they don't trust business. They do trust universities.
Okay.
It's actually very interesting.
In Canada?
Yeah. The high level of trust.
Is it going up or down? Do you know that? No?
It fluctuates.
Okay.
Trust in all public institutions is in decline. So, but so the way you put the questions, I think, really good. So, is the place going to survive just because there is that level of trust? And to some extent, it's true. But it's only true insofar as students coming into these institutions and the public who fund them believe that what the institutions are doing is valuable. Because, I mean, they do exist, I suppose, because of the generosity of the general public, so everybody's got to trust that these institutions are not only not going to cheat anybody, but more than that, that we're going to continue to be useful to society and to the students who come here. I think, how do you earn that trust and how do you preserve that? So I guess in a way I'm saying my answer to the question is I agree with your read of it, that it's partly because these places are trusted that they'll continue. But they will continue only to the extent that they continue to satisfy that trust. And what does that mean? And I think that's linked to the question of what people want when they learn. So what I've observed in the period since all the talk about MOOCs is that it's not the case that online learning has even come close to threatening in-person learning on the Mac campus or at many, many other Canadian universities. What has really happened, which I think is really exciting, is a kind of a hybrid model emerging in which technology is embraced, provides new ways of engaging students in the learning process, which are then added on to some of the beneficial aspects of in-person education. And sometimes the technology drives changes in the way that in-person stuff happens. So the notion of the flipped classroom, for example, is fantastic. So you go from a classroom in which, a professor like me used to come in and drone away at the front, just covering basic content, to a situation in which it's assumed the students will be able to acquire the content of the course through online preparation, reading stuff that's been posted. And then that leaves you then with an opportunity to do something completely different in the classroom. In the classroom,
okay.
And then that's where these things which are important to the new dimension of learning come in. Group learning, self-directed learning, research-based learning, work-integrated learning. So it doesn't have to happen in a classroom anymore. It can happen in the workplace. So I actually think, listening to me at the start of my answer to this question, you might have thought I was this predictable old-fashioned English prof. But I actually love technology and what it's doing to higher ed. And my perception of it is that we're entering a really nice phase in which technology has lost that cachet of being the whole of the future to being that fabulous human development, which is going to assist us to do other things, to do better the human dimension of learning.
Going back to a bit to higher education, we have a really exciting component of the technology that's comes. I came across the statistics, and it's a U.S. statistics, so please bear with me here. That completely blew my mind. Like I told people in this room before. So I read that in 2015 they did a study in terms of trust in universities, and 57% trusted the universities, whatever that was. And then in 2018, it went down to like 48%. And then what they did, they separated into Republicans and Democrats. And then you can imagine the trend is that for Republicans went from like 56 to 38, and Democrats from 68 to 62. So it's like a drastic change. So when I saw that, I'm like, why? Is it because... So all the questions I want to think, do you think it's more statistics? A prof in statistics taught me that there open lie, there's closed lie, and then there's statistics. So is it this, or there's just a trend that we may be noticing right now, or it will go back, as you said, it fluctuates?
Yeah. So I'm not a statistician. I can't really comment on the reliability of these kinds of stats. And as you acknowledged, that issue of trust is very different in this country from the US. But I think that question has to do with the rather weird moment we're in historically. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that we, in a very short period, have gone from being a society that was all about evidence and research and decisions made on the basis of sound evidence to being actually, to people who do what I do, this is sort of stupefying to think that we exist at a cultural moment in which truth, interest in evidence, and all of these things is being disparaged, and not just by minorities, but by the occupant of the White House. You know, I mean, and same is true in the UK. I mean, one of Theresa May's most well-known cabinet members spoke about having heard enough from experts, right? We've had enough of experts on. So that is a really weird thing, because the whole notion of the progress of global society, certainly in the West, in the post-war era, has been tied to the issue of the progress of science, the examination of evidence, and the advancement of analysis, and so on. And everything from technology to ethics to, I mean, even thinking about progress from colonialism to a post-colonial period is premised on the idea of the power of analysis to reach an understanding of some kind of truth, which is always then understood to be provisional, pending further analysis and so on. And it's impossible to me now to separate the question of the way in which institutions of higher learning are perceived from this broader ferment of skepticism about expertise that has gripped the US, but it's also there in the UK, and there's an argument you could make for it being active in our culture in Canada right now in certain provinces.
Do you think it's active in, I don't know, do you think it's active in universities? Like, do you think there are people who might come with already kind of established beliefs that this is how it's supposed to be done, and this is how it will be done, so no matter what you say, I will just roll with it? Like, it's I encountered that when I was in school, and it was very interesting for me because, again, I came from a foreign country. I think I changed my beliefs 3 times while I was in universities. Like, it was I had no idea what, like, people were talking. I didn't know idea of a left or right political spectrum, like none of it. So like, oh, I'm this, and then I'm this, and then through discussions kind of solidified like my understanding, and then science education gave me this, like, facts are everything, check your studies. But then sometimes, like, I talk to people even like on campus, and I don't see that as well. So like, even in Canada, which completely blows me away.
I think, you know, I mean, so people who do what I do have an idealistic vision of what happens in university, and that's that we're all a combination of perfect open-mindedness and powerful conviction and, you know, determination to bring our analytical gifts to bear on anything, and so, you know, able to embrace complete provisionality, right? Yeah. But actually, human nature doesn't really work that way, and so a university is just like any other societal construct. It's a mixture of people, some of whom are very open-minded and some of whom are not. I think probably the proportion of people interested in reassessing their understanding of things on the basis of evidence provided is much higher in universities, as it should be.
Yeah, I really hope so.
But at the same time, you know, part of what's fabulous about universities and why I've always loved them is they're places of debate, and you don't have debate unless people are prepared to argue for and fight for a position they believe in. So there's a certain aspect to the university that has to see openness working in some kind of dynamic tension with belief and acceptance of certain facts. Do you know what I mean? So if we thought everything was, you know, if we were all universally open-minded, we'd live in a sort of bizarre postmodern universe in which the notion of even a provisional truth would have no meaning. That's not the way it works, you know. I mean, academics, the students who come and study here, the academics who teach them, are almost all engaged in the pursuit of truth and a heightened understanding of their field. They will all understand truth differently. You know, what is truth to an English literature professor like me? It's not the way Rudy Giuliani would ask. So what is truth? But it's a different kind of question. But what is it? You know, if a literary critic is seeking truth, what is it? I mean, is it a refined understanding? Is it a demystification of meaning? Is it an understanding of the constituent parts of meaning? I don't know. But that's something very different, let's say, from what, let's say, someone in physics is trying to understand in experimental physics when they're actually trying to understand something about the laws of nature. So we're all here trying to understand truth. We'd all define it slightly differently. The thing looks different. But the goal is the same. And here, way more than outside of the boundaries of the university, one hopes that there is implicitly anyway openness to being just like you were, contradicted and changed, you know. I mean,
and you talking both students or students maybe and professors?
Everybody. It's everybody. I mean, I see students and professors, it's a continuum, right? Whether you're an undergrad student or grad student or a professor. These places are about an approach to the mind and a use of the mind to engage with the world that should be pretty consistent. The only thing that's different is that people are at different stages in the process of engaging with the world through that intellectual capacity. And when you're just beginning, when you come out of high school and you come here, whoa, it's sort of bizarre to be in a place where, yes, you're going to be told this is the accepted interpretation of how the world works. So we're telling you that, but we're also telling you that implicit in this is the expectation that you will ask questions and you will challenge this.
Do you think people challenge? I cannot not ask this. Do you think people challenge this more now or less? Kind of. We talk all the time on campuses and how there's like it's always leaned more to the liberal side of things. And then, like, do you think that students challenge the ideas more these days in terms of, I know, I'm not sure if you're teaching at this point, but it's just something that always very interesting for me, even in classes. Like, I think I had a great advantage because I didn't grow up here, so I ask all the kind of stupid questions just like I do right now. So that's kind of, there's no background for me. So I would like, why is that? But do you think this is kind of the common thing on campus right now, or it's a more we advance, like we figured it out, like we know what's right?
Asking questions is the essence of what the university is. It's nothing other than a place which is about asking questions. And so everything you do, whether you're a researcher in a lab or whether you're sitting in a classroom as a student, if you're not in the business of asking questions or of helping people ask questions or of showing them why something should be questioned, you're not doing the work of the university. So another way of putting it is to say universities aren't about opinion. We don't teach opinion. We teach a way of thinking, and a way of thinking that is premised on the notion of interrogation. You question everything. So for me, there's no such thing as too much. And there is such a thing as too much opinion, because the spouting of opinion is it's going to happen in universities, yes. Is it commensurate with the mandate and the goals of universities? Not really. So I think it's impossible to say whether people ask more questions now than they did before. I mean, I was an undergraduate student in South Africa during apartheid. I was a student rebel, so I was asking questions about that political system and supporting people who did. People who asked questions much more bravely than I did, you know. I'm also a child of the 1960s, so had I been in North America during that period, I would have been involved in various kinds of student activism, I'm quite sure, and I would have been asking questions. Yeah. And I think right now, students continue to ask questions and should be encouraged to do so. They do so in a slightly different kind of context, and I think it's to be encouraged, however it manifests itself. But you mentioned that universities tend to the left. Yeah. Well, the way I like to think about it is that it's not so much they tend towards the left, it's they tend away from doctrine.
But isn't there doctrine on both sides?
Yes, there is. Marx is right, it's our doctrine, right? Yes. So, but that's not, people don't mistrust universities because they think too much Marx is being read here. or they don't even care too much what doctrine there is afoot. But I think what is disconcerting to some people about universities, and it's why they don't tend to thrive in authoritarian countries, is that the habit of asking questions is anathema to people who wish to see society proceed on the basis of certain untested assumptions about who has privilege, who should have the right to vote, who should not, whether one color is better than another color, whether being an original person somewhere is more important than being a visitor, so to me that's, so yeah, you might say the habit of questioning looks like a preoccupation of the left, but on the left you can get just as doctrinaire and inflexible as you can on the right, and there is a way even on the political right of exercising that capacity for questioning, but as a defining attribute, which indeed the technique of questioning is to universities, I think you could probably defend the argument that it is about subverting. Universities do subvert. That's the point of them. Which is why to say, well, it's just about producing job-ready grads for the market is anathema to the mission of universities. Because, we want to do that because we want our students to really succeed and we want a great, healthy, and prosperous society. But the argument would always be one way in which you prepare students for that is by cultivating the art of questioning and subversion. We don't, except in a profound sense, teach compliance in a university. I mean, there is an argument, you might say. I mean, universities, like any social institution, it's an institution which enshrines certain kinds of behavior, and it certainly enshrines a certain kind of economic system. So, it's a creation with its own contradictions. And when you come here, you are to some extent socialized, as you are in any human institution. The one thing, I suppose, that sets universities apart from other socializing institutions is its insistence on questioning those institutions.
This is, I think, a great way to finish.
Oh, all right.
Awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.